All right. So under the File menu, if I go down to Help, you do have the BobCAD-CAM Help up here. This is our help system. I do definitely recommend everybody check it out. If you ever get stuck on something or you don't understand what a term is, you can always search it. But if you go down to the BobART section here, there's an overview that kind of details out what BobART is and what you're doing with it. It goes through all the vectorization, the stock, the emboss, and some of these have examples. So like under Vectorize, you do have an example of doing multicolored strategies. There's a little downloadable file that you can follow along with this tutorial. This is a really good tutorial just going through vectorization, how to use a multicolored image. Can get quite complicated at times. We're going to try to look at that a little bit this afternoon if we have the opportunity. There's also under emboss, let's see here. They moved it around a little bit, but there is a tutorial for the embossing that is really good that I wanted to show everybody here. So there's a save embossed model example, which this one, I don't use this feature very often, but you can save embossed images. But what I'm really looking for is the pig art. It's a cross section. The features, interesting. Where did it go? I may have to get with our help system guy to find out where that went. There are examples under each one of these though, but the example I'm looking for is this one particular one that goes through a pig art. They give you a little 2D drawing to start out with. Really good tutorial. If I find it, I'll make sure that I show you guys where that's at. You could probably even just start typing that in. Let's see if it pops up. Yeah, so there's a pig art emboss tutorial. So if you just type in pig art under the search bar, it should pop that up. I'm not exactly sure where this is at in the help system, but searching for it brings it right up. And this one actually goes through a lot of really good details with embossing. So if you guys are doing 3D embosses, I definitely recommend checking this tutorial out. It's a must-see for any of your embossing stuff. All right, so let's take a look at some of the vectorization. Now we're going to start out with something really simple, just a black and white image. So if I go to Images, I'll right-click on it, and I'm going to go down to Load Image. So I'm just going to grab this BobCAD-CAM logo, and I'll hit Open. Now this is not a great image, and I use this one particularly because it does have quite a few shades of gray. And if you really zoom in, you can see there's a lot of kind of speckled coloring in the background. The edges are not very well defined. It's not a terribly good image. But if I right-click the image under the BobART tab, I'm going to go to Vectorize. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is the two-level strategy. So there's a threshold value, and what this is essentially doing is it's setting where that threshold is, defining the different shades as white or black. So as I move this bar, it's going to change the quality of the vectorization. You can see it got rid of a lot of stuff already. But if I go too far down, you're going to start noticing things are going to disappear. It's starting to trim off a lot more of those letters. And eventually, the little trademark thing goes away. Now it's starting to look kind of speckled. So you want to find that nice balance of the threshold. So let's go, let's say somewhere around here. That's not terrible. We should be able to clean that up pretty well. Now I'm just going to hit OK. Now I really can't see the geometry because I have my image here. So if I hit the I key on my keyboard, I is an image, it'll hide that image for me. Now if I start zooming in, the cat head doesn't look terrible, That could probably be improved a little bit. And if I look at the lettering, it could be improved quite a bit. Now, I can go in and just start manipulating this geometry, and a lot of people would do that. However, BobART gives you a couple of tools to help kind of mitigate the details of that image. So let's go ahead and right-click Vectorize again. And down at the bottom, I can change the accuracy. So if I change my accuracy to, say, 1.2, making it a looser accuracy, it's not looking as tightly at the image, it can smooth a lot of things out. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. We'll hit OK. And it actually didn't clean it up that much. It cleaned up the cat head quite a bit. That looks a lot better than it did. But the lettering really didn't change much. So if I go too high with that number, let's say we go up to like 2, things will really start to distort. You can already start seeing that in the lettering. Cat head still looks fine. Not quite sure where that level will be with this accuracy, but let's just throw an unrealistic number in there like 10. You can start to see that it really throws it all off. So the accuracy is how tightly it looks at each pixel. So by saying 10, it's looking at 10 pixels across that image to define that geometry. If you go too tight, too small of a number, let's say like 0.2, you're going to get a lot more of that jaggedness that's in the pixelization of the image. I'm seeing it all over the place. So there is a fine balance that you want to find when it comes to that accuracy. So let's go ahead, let's just jump this up to, 1.5. Now there's also this remove chains less than, and I don't really think that this is going to be a huge factor. But for instance, I can try to get rid of the little trademark logo instead of deleting it by increasing the number of pixels that it's going to omit if there's no chain, or if there's a chain under this amount of pixels. So this shouldn't affect any of the lettering, but if I make this, let's say 75, don't know what the threshold is going to be for that. But so I got rid of the T, but it didn't get rid of the M. So let's expand that a little bit. Say 100. But now it got rid of not only the dash in between the CAD and CAM, but it also got rid of inside of the B and the A's. Not a really great option there. So I would rather just go ahead and delete it. I'm just going to bump that back down to 50. And then I can just delete what I don't need. Now the lettering did not come out very good. The cat head pretty much came out exactly the way it should. And if I bring the image back, I notice that there's a couple of areas where it's not perfect. And I should be able to go in and kind of correct that. But let's see if we can't change this accuracy. Let's go back to 1.2. Now I think it created a different entity there, and it didn't. So I want to break this or kind of manipulate this so that I can create a straight section in this rounded part of the head. And I'm also going to need to kind of manipulate these letters. You can start to see where they bowed out. They're not really consistent. So there's a little bit of cleanup throughout this part. Not a whole lot, though. Now, the cleanup on most of BobART stuff that I do is really under utilities, and you're going to be looking at this stretch, drag corner, and deform. Those are the 3 tools that you use the most. Now, deform will take arcs or lines and kind of manipulate them a little bit. So, for instance, if I take this one, it actually changes that radius. Now, I'm going to cancel because I need to turn off a couple of things. One, we're going to turn off our snap increment. That one really hinders you when it comes to BobART. That's down here at the bottom right-hand corner of the software. I also turn off construction lines. Unless I'm trying to square something up and line things up together, which most of the time you're not going to with BobART, I disable that function. So that way when I come in and say do a drag corner or deform, let's just drag this corner upward. I can get more accuracy out of it. I can kind of get what I'm looking for and not just kind of what it thinks I should have. So I'm actually going to go in here and radius this. So let's go to deform now. I can stretch this in, bring that in a little bit, bring this out a little bit. And if I keep hitting the I key on my keyboard, I can toggle that shading, or toggle that image on and off, then I can see if I'm lining it up right. You know, I got these radiuses here, bring those in a little bit, but I may want to manipulate them. I may actually want to go and do a drag corner and take this guy up more. Bring this guy down a little bit more. Now I can deform it and kind of get this into the shape that I'm looking for. Now I can still go in and fill it and add other details, but you got to remember too that it's only going to get the details as small as your tool allows. So if you're going in with a pretty large tool and you're going into sharp corners or corners that are not quite radius than they need to be, it's really not going to make a huge difference. It's not going to shift it too much for you. Let's do a drag corner on this guy. I'm going to straighten that out a little bit. And I may even want to bring it up. So I've already clicked on the screen, so it's already dropped it. So I need to right-click and hit OK to kind of confirm that position, and now I can grab that corner again and move it. Sometimes you'll have to manipulate these a little bit at a time to get it to line up right. So we'll do another deform. Bend this radius out, make it look tangent. And that's really what I'm looking for, is just to make things look a little tangent. Yeah, so I might actually have to manipulate this a little bit more, get the tangency, and then kind of drag my corners so that it lines up right. Yeah, that looks a little bit better to me. So that V is shaping up a little bit better. Now I don't really care for this line in here, the way that it sits, but might not be a lot we can do with it. Maybe drag it out a little bit. And it's mostly in line with the stuff at the bottom. I'll just kind of visually bump this out a little bit. And that kind of cleans up the B. And really it's just doing the same things throughout the rest of the drawing. So like this O here, I'd probably take my corner and drag it over. Drag this corner over here. Maybe drag this corner down. So that creates kind of the flatter section of the O. Maybe even drag this corner down. And then I would deform the rest of it. You know, I've already kind of got that up here. This corner I may want to bump out so that those arcs are a little bit more tangent, not so wavy. And really it's just trying to make it look good. That's really the whole goal. So go and deform. Now you may have to go in and deform and then go and change corners again, depending on what you're looking for. Now, that's not terrible, but I may want to change this corner a little bit. But that's not bad. We'll keep that the way it is. We'll kind of skim through the rest of this. Now I'm already on deform, but I want to go back to drag corners, so let's go ahead and switch over. Maybe bring this edge down a little bit. Bring this up. Maybe bring this up and over. Looks like it's broken down the middle. And you can toggle the image off while you're doing this. So if you really wanted to kind of toggle it on and off as you go through, you absolutely can. Now that created a radius in there, and I can use the deform to straighten it out. but I may actually want to just draw a line. You know, a lot of times I'll go back and I'll delete stuff and recreate entities that make more sense. I got a little extra geometry there, so let's go ahead and delete that. And I just hit delete on the keyboard to get rid of it. And really, these corners won't be too much of an issue. However, I will deform them just so whatever tool we have is going to follow the deformed edge, not a chamfer. It won't even matter that the other side's not. It's whatever tool we use, it would be the same all the way through. Now this one, it looks like it's taken the entire thing here and made a radius, which is all right, but that really kind of creates issues with the way that this corner is going to drag. So we may have to manipulate this one quite a bit, but we're going to try to bring the corner down to the middle and then deform the rest of it so it kind of lines up. And still right there, it's kind of out a little bit, and I don't really like that. So we may actually add a line to this. So this whole section of this C, I would probably want to get rid of. I don't like this at all. This is not very easy to work with. But what I will do is I'll keep the vertical line and just move it over a little bit. I try to line stuff up with the pixels on the screen. Just gives me an easier path to follow. And if I really want to straighten stuff up, I can. All right, so I'm probably going to recreate this whole entire section here. So let's go ahead and cancel. I'll go to my select mode, and I'm just going to pick those two radiuses and hit delete on my keyboard. Now, a lot of people, when they go to kind of fix stuff up like this, they're going to use a spline. Now, me personally, I don't use splines too often anymore. I have started using, under Create 2D, this continuous sketch. Very handy, but it is very difficult to use at first. So you have your start point, you pick a midpoint, and then you pick an end point. Even doing straight lines, you're just picking 3 points. You're always picking kind of a midpoint. So now I have that all kind of brought back in. Let's go ahead and do a trim 2 entities. And even if I didn't get it right, now I have the number of entities I really need to go in and do drag corner and deform to really get this where I want it. And you don't have to be this critical when you're doing your own. I'm just being a little picky here. And I know I'm not following the same color everywhere, but using what straight lines I got. Now this one I have the same kind of issues, so I'm probably going to make this a continuous sketch as well. I really do need kind of a straight line here. So we'll just go ahead and delete that section as well. Now I can go in and just create a line first. So more than able to just sketch a line, which I did not snap to the end. Which, if any of you guys are in version 34, they did add a join to closest, so it's going to snap to the closest snap point. So you don't have to worry about getting right on the snap point anymore. You can just pick the line closest to the point if you're on version 34. If not, I definitely recommend you take a look at Upgrade. So I'll pick my midpoint. There's my radius. Make kind of a straight line segment. create my radius here. And that's not bad. I'd probably leave that alone. But you can see that it's little details. And again, you only want to do as much as your tool is going to show. There's no point in going too crazy with details if the tool is not going to make that when it cuts it. Now, I'm probably going to want to manipulate this by redrawing it, but we're going to try just taking these little arc segments. We're going to try bending them and see if we can't get them into a better shape. It's not bad. Let's go ahead and drag this corner up. Kind of straighten it out a little bit. Yeah, let's take it to about there. Deform that. Maybe deform this in a little bit. Yeah, it's not too bad. Give a little radius on the corners. Maybe square up the inside of the A here a little bit. Again, not trying to make it perfect, just follow something here. And I definitely recommend get used to using the zoom to cursor. So as you move your mouse around the screen, you can pan, zooming in and out like I'm doing right now. It does make this stuff a lot easier when you're comfortable doing that. I don't know how people used BobCAD before we had that feature. That was something that I really needed when I first started with BobCAD. So I've got a little extra piece here. Let's just delete that. And for the most part, that A is kind of fixed. I'm not too worried about the top. It's going to look pretty decent when it cuts it. Yeah, we'll continue with D. I usually start out with drag corner first. It just depends on what drawing I'm doing and what details I'm trying to get. It seems like these corners, there's really tiny entities that are kind of hanging out. So I'll have to do a cleanup and optimize when I'm done, just to see if it gets rid of anything. We're going to stretch this all the way down. The nice thing about drag corner is that you can actually stretch what you're manipulating. That shouldn't look too bad. Looks pretty smooth. I got this little section down here I need to delete. Now the rest of it I'm not going to worry about cleaning up. I'm going to get rid of the little trademark thing because that's just too small to cut. So we should see these letters pretty much look as bad as this. It is going to be kind of ugly there, but that'll at least kind of show you guys what that'll do. So let's make this a job. Now, one of the things that BobART gives you is the VCarve toolpath. Now, the VCarve toolpath is actually kind of fun to play with. And we're going to create a rectangle around this thing. And we need to make it a lot bigger than that. Yeah, that'll work. All right, so we have a rectangle around our BobCAD logo. And we're going to do a couple of things. I'm going to show you guys a few different ways you can approach this. Now my stock, I'm not too worried about. I'm just going to make it 1 inch thick. And my origin, I'm going to leave right where it's at in the bottom left-hand corner. Now, for those of you that don't know, if you're not on version 34, there is some new features with the CAM tree. So let me go ahead and show you guys that really quick. We started using 34 for all these events when we released it. In these settings, you now have user interface settings. That's where your theme is, your selection mask, the tree behavior, whether you're double clicking to edit or expand a feature. But there is in here the CAM. So there's the enable CAM tree flyouts, that we had those in the previous versions. But there's auto blank new items. So as we go through, you're going to see it blank out my stock as I make it, blank out Toolpath as I make it. It's a nice new feature that we added in 34. Plus you have the style of the CAM tree. You can change this up. So if any of you are on 34 and don't like it, you can change it to the classic. That'll bring your CAM tree back to the original way that it looked. If you are on the extended, you can change your status location from left to right. That's the boxes here that show blank and post yes, no. I've just gotten used to it on the left. And then you have either icons or checkboxes. I prefer the icons because I don't know what each checkbox is unless I'm looking all the way up at the top of that list. But we just added a few more ways that you can customize your software. So if you're confused on what's going on as I make Toolpath, it's on, auto blank is on, so it's blanking it as I make stuff. So one of the things that you get with BobART is the VCarve Toolpath. So there's a lot of different ways to use VCarve, and the first one, it's down here, all the way down at the next to additional functions. But the first method that I'm going to show you guys is setting no depth, setting really nothing, just telling it to carve. So I'll select geometry, and I'm going to just pick everything on the inside. And I am going to hold shift and pick it. I was about to window pick, but we're going to hold shift and pick everything because there were a couple entities that I didn't expect. We just want to make sure that these are all good chains. Now the VCarve will show additional details that you might not get when you're doing like just a standard pocket. And you'll see why here shortly. So just like the 2-axis features, you will see your geometry in this lower right-hand corner. Total depth, I'm not even going to worry about. We're just going to leave it at a 1/2 inch. And you know what? Just for fun, let's change it to 125 so you guys can see what's happening here. It really doesn't matter what I put in the depth because it's going to ignore it. For this first example, we're just going to do a VCarve finishing, and that's it. I don't need anything on this posting page, and we're just going to leave the 1/2 inch 90-degree default tool. Now the parameters can get kind of confusing, and for the first little example, we're not going to set anything. You have your V tool depth of cut, the roughing step over, and the pocketing parameters. We're going to leave it on none. This cleanup doesn't do anything for what we're doing right now. So I'll hit compute. So it's cutting in between each one of those letters, but if you notice, even though I only told it 125 thou, the BobCat logo is going way deeper. This is actually almost 1 inch. So why did it do that? It did that because we told it to not pocket with anything. We told it just to carve. When you tell VCarve finishing none for the pocketing options, it's going to go as deep as it can until it makes a V out of the cut. Now, VCarve will show additional details in the geometry because it goes and traces those little corners. So you can see it didn't really work out for this, but it really did a good job on these letters. But even the chamfers that were on this little piece here show up in the VCarve. So be aware what type of toolpath you're doing will show different details. Yeah, that A is all sorts of crooked, and it shows it very well when you do just a VCarve. So just be aware when you're setting stuff up, depending on the feature types that you're going to be using, you may have to approach cleanup in different ways. So what if I only wanted it to go 125,000 depth? Maybe I only want that 1/8 of an inch depth. So I can go in and edit this feature, and on my parameters, I'll tell it to use the V tool for the pocketing. Now it's going to use a 25,000 step over. So what this is going to do now is it's telling it, don't go any deeper than 1/8 of an inch. And if I hover my mouse over this, I can see that's where the Z is here. That's 122. So yeah, that's pretty much right there. This is kind of a rough estimate of where my Z is. But when I simulate it, it's going to leave that rough floor within the CAD. So we'll speed through it a little bit. It didn't change the lettering, but it changed the way that it treated the CAD head. So it's going to have this rough floor, which depending on your application may not be a bad thing. However, if we want to get rid of that, let's go ahead and take a look at doing so. So that's where the tapered pocketing comes in. So if I go back down to edit, let's go ahead and go to machining strategy, and we're going to add a tapered pocketing, and we're going to move it to the top. So we're making it the first toolpath in this. Let's just say we've got let's say 1/4 inch flat end mill. Depth of cut's 1/8 of an inch. Step over 25%, that should be fine. Typically on a VCarve, because you're usually doing more intricate details, the smaller step over can help clean up stuff a little bit better. And then we've got our VCarve finishing tool, and I want to set my pocketing parameters back to none. This is now when the V tool cleanup comes into play. So it's using a 10,000 step in the corners to clean up little tight areas that the end mill couldn't get. Usually I bump that down to about 5,000 personally, just to clean up more of that stuff. Now the tapered pocketing is only pocketing the cat head because it's the only place that it could fit. The VCarve finish is doing everything else. So if we look at this simulation, it's going to give us a flat bottom in the cat head and tapered walls. You can see where that 5,000 cleanup step over helps clean this stuff up in the corners. And if I zoom in on it and go to verification, we can apply the refine to take a look at that step over a little bit more. Yeah, so that's really not leaving a lot in those corners. That 5,000 step over really takes care of a lot of that stuff. Now, what if I add the geometry on the outside? Well, it's going to change the way that it pockets. This is a pocketing toolpath, so to speak. So if I add this geometry on the outside, it's going to machine between the two sets of geometry. So if I compute this now, tapered pocketing is going everywhere, and the VCarve is trimming everything down the walls. Now it's going to offset that flat end mill for the tapered walls. So you don't do any additional pocketing, you don't do anything special. The only downside is you can't do an open pocket. So if any of you guys have wanted to do something like this, but you wanted to leave the walls, what you do is you define it slightly bigger and then just cut that down, or it be off the part, you know, if your part's actually a little smaller than that. You just define your area that you're cutting a little larger. You know, for instance, here, if I didn't want the tapered walls on the outside, I can go in and do a offset. Let's offset it. Yeah, 1/4 inch should be plenty, but we'll do it up to the right. That should be plenty, but we're going to have to find out here. So I'll reselect geometry. We'll deselect that one rectangle and add the outside again. Go ahead and recompute our toolpath. And the tapered finishing looks like it's going to be on the outside of that. So let's take a look at the simulation. Now it's going to still run the toolpath on the outside, but at least now I have a flat wall or a flat floor all the way across. So there is no open pocketing. You can't do the dashed lines, but you can still offset and create an open pocket. VCarve can be a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool things that I've seen people do with it. But again, you are going to see more detail of geometry. It's going to be different detail, but you are going to see more detail out of the geometry. So if I verify and apply refine here, it's still leaving those little flats, little chamfers that are on it. My A is definitely very crooked. You know, all of those flaws that are in the drawing start to come out a little bit more. So if you plan on doing VCarve, you're going to want to have as clean a geometry as you can possibly get. Now we're going to go ahead and continue with just vectorizing another image, going through a couple of other things here. Maybe we'll do a multicolored image. Let's just open up a new file. And we're going to go to our BobART tab, right-click images, and load image. Let's see what we got here. And this one has a lot of details that are kind of interesting to take a look at. Let's go ahead and open that one. Now this is a multicolored image. There's a lot more than 3 colors in this, but there are more than 2. So let's take a look at how that affects the drawing. So we'll go to vectorize. First thing is you still have the 2-level black and white strategy available to you. But depending on where I have this slider, the orange gets designated as white when I go lower. As I go higher, it gets designated as part of the black end of the spectrum. So you do have to find that balance, especially with a multicolored image, to get a good vectorization, to actually get what you're wanting. So you can intentionally omit that by going to a lower threshold value. And that just gets the logo. And it's not too terrible. I mean, it's pretty decently clean. Some of it's a little bit ugly. But again, we can use our accuracy, and by lowering that, increasing the number, lowering the accuracy, that can smooth some of it out, and that gives you a little bit easier time manipulating it and cleaning it up. Now, if you wanted to use the multicolored strategy, you're going to see that there's 64 colors max. Typically, though, I go down to 3. The reason I do that is I can control exactly what color I'm going to get. Now, if you notice, there's actually orange inside of the white, in between the white and the black. So if I get rid of the orange and tell it to just vectorize, let's say, the black, I'm going to get one result. If I edit this and tell it to do the white, I'll get a very different result. So you do have to be kind of aware of what the effects are, or what each color is going to kind of give you. And if I go in and do just the orange, I'm getting all this extra stuff in the middle. And even the Golden Gate Bridge is not really as clean as it was with the white. So sometimes you'll have unsuspected colors to select from that are probably going to be better off. You know, in this case, white, I think, comes out the cleanest. When I do the white, it's going to also get the boundary of that image. Now, if you're doing multicolored and you want each color separated, that's where things get a little different. We're going to look at that a little bit more this afternoon. I have a multicolored image we're going to go through embossing with. So we'll kind of address that when we get to it. All right. Now, if I do 2 colors, you're going to get all of those details right on top of each other. So typically when you do multicolored, you're going to want to do one color at a time. And like I said, we're going to take a look at that in a little more detail this afternoon on how to manage the geometry, because that's where it gets complicated. So let's see what other kind of images we've got here. All right. New file, images. Let's just load another one. Most of these come in pretty clean. This Baskin-Robbins one is pretty low resolution, and it's pretty ugly, but you can get a pretty clean vectorization out of it. This is one that I've used for an example for years now. So we'll go to Vectorize. Now, that's hideous. There's a lot of extra stuff in there. But as soon as I move that threshold, it cleans up so much. So if I go too far down, you're going to notice that things start disappearing, though. So there is a balance with where you bring that threshold value. Now, if I hit OK, I want to say this is one that when I tighten or when I loosen up the accuracy, it cleans it up a lot. Now, that's not great, but it's not terrible either. The R and the B are just kind of fine, but the lettering is pretty bad. So let's go back in there. I believe this one, if I go to like a 1.2 accuracy or so, it cleans it up a lot more than some of the other ones that I've dealt with. So this is an example of one that the image is terrible. It is really bad, low resolution. You wouldn't expect to get anything good. But by using these tools, by using these little details of the accuracy, the pixels, remove chains less than, let's try 50, you can start to remove some things. Now, if I bring that value too high again, I'm going to run into the same problem I did on the last one, where it's going to start deleting other stuff. So now it's gotten rid of all the centers of those letters in the I, just to get rid of the marking. Now you can also scale your geometry within BobART, but here's the problem. And it's not really a problem if you have a good image, so this is not a problem for everybody. But if I go and scale this up, so if I say I want this to be 5 inches in X, it'll keep the aspect ratio, so it's going to scale Y to coincide with it to keep the same size. But now, if I want to modify it, if I want to look at the image and kind of tweak it and trace it, I can't. It's now too big to do that. So I would have to either just clean it up as it is, or I'd have to bring it back to size and then scale it later. So even though you have the option to scale in here, typically you're probably not going to, unless you have a really good image. Now that I've scaled that up, I'm just going to close it and reopen it. We'll just bring that guy back in here. Now, if I wanted to scale this though, but I want to clean it up first, you're just using Translate. Translate's the way I usually typically scale stuff. We'll go a little higher there, maybe go to 50 there. Yeah, I couldn't remember the size. I should have wrote it down or something. But now, if I wanted to clean this up, trace it, kind of manipulate it a little bit so that it looks a little bit better, I'm not going to worry about doing that on this one, but let's just say that we already did so. But now I want to scale it up. 2 things. One, when you scale an image, it's based off the image size. So wherever that image cuts off over here, that's what it's scaling from, is that full length of that image. So if I want the actual piece that I'm getting out of it to be a specific size, well, you're going to have to vectorize or scale it at this stage anyways. So typically what I do is I'll do a measure 2, because measure 2 will stay on your screen. You have a little measure entity window. And I'll just measure the widest point I can find. Whether it's a vertical or horizontal, it doesn't really matter. So I can see that the distance is a little over 3 inches. And actually, let's go ahead and let's do the other side, because it may actually give us a better measurement. Oh, So the y, 1.98. So if I wanted to make the y-axis, let's say 3, I would use my utilities translate, pick the entire geometry, and then my scale, I enter what I have divided by what I want. So 1.98 divided by 3. Oh, I'm sorry. Take the number you want divided by the number you have. Thinking backwards today. So that gave me the scale factor of a little over 1.5. Now if I go and remeasure that, I should get 3 inches. If not dead on, relatively close, which now I have 3. So you have a lot more control over the actual size of the part, the scale, when you do it after you vectorize. You still have the option to within the vectorization, but again, depending on the image that you're doing, if you're, say taking this BobCAD logo, which is mostly white in the background, you're not going to get the size that you think you are. It is going to be a lot smaller. I would want to measure from one end to the other of the BobCAM to actually figure out the size. And again, if any of you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. We do have that little questions box in the GoToWebinar panel. All right, so let's see here. Let's go ahead and do some tracing. Now, there are times where you're going to have geometry or images that are not very good. And actually, you'll find a lot of times you're not going to have very good images unless you have a logo that you've made yourself. I find that most of the images that I run across have issues with it. So one of the ones that I use is this skull. Now, this is an image that I found online. I can't give credit to the original artist, whoever they are. I apologize, but this was just found on Google's image search. But the vectorization I would get out of this is terrible. I can go in and try to bring my threshold value to a spot that's going to work, but if you notice, it's getting real fuzzy real quick. I'm either losing a lot of geometry or losing a lot of stuff, or it's real fuzzy everywhere else. Now, there are ways to kind of manipulate that. I can find a spot that looks decent, maybe bring it right around there, and I could remove chains less than, say, 50. So it doesn't get everything in the middle, but it's still really fuzzy. It's still going to give me very bad geometry. So this is one that I would not really be able to vectorize very well. You can't even really use the multicolored on this because the shades of blue are so close, really doesn't help you. So when you go down to 3 colors, you're still getting 2 shades of blue and white. And if I do the white, you're getting decent, but that's about the best you're going to get. This is actually in the drawing. So if I wanted to use this, I would have to trace it. This would be one that I would absolutely need to trace. So let's go ahead and get rid of the vectorization. And I just highlighted the whole thing and hit delete on my keyboard. And then we're going to bring the image back. Now, there's a lot of different ways to trace an image. All of them are going to be under Create 2D. And again, because of deform and drag corner, you don't have to be super accurate right away. You can kind of roughly sketch it and then tweak things into place, make it look nice. Because a lot of times you might even change the way that it's drawn here. So one of the things that I do is I'll use line continuous a lot. So the reason I'll use line continuous is, say, like in this section here, I might just roughly sketch, which I need to get rid of the snaps and construction lines. I may just quickly sketch a line in each one of these little cavities. Now, you notice I am just drawing 3 straight lines on each one of these. Obviously, this is not straight. But when I use that drag corner and deform, that's what's going to bend it. So I'm really not too worried about getting it exact. You really don't have to. Now I'm omitting these two because those get a little tricky. And if I hide the image, I've gotten a good start. So again, using utilities and deform and drag corner, I can quickly kind of bend these into place to where they look good. Now I may still want to go in and drag corners, fit this stuff up, get it nice and neat. Try to find a defined section I want to go off of for stuff. Maybe I'm going off of this corner in here. But those are little details that you kind of decide as you go through and kind of make up your mind on those type of things as you go. And again, using that zoom to cursor for panning around the screen really helps tremendously with getting around a part quickly. So if you're not comfortable with that already, I definitely recommend playing around with it, zooming in and out, moving around the screen, because it definitely does make a huge difference. Now you do have arcs, you do have splines. Splines we'll reserve for another little section. Like I said, continuous sketch is always good. But for line, I might have straight sections like this. Now, in a lot of cases, I would just draw these two lines and then bend it into place. But if I draw those two lines and then use continuous sketch, again, I'll snap the first point, the second point, and then the connecting to join it. That just created that radius for me. Now for the outside, I can actually just use an arc. Now I don't really know the size, but we do have a 2-point diameter. So 2-point diameter, I can just pick 2 points along the diameter of this thing and then kind of move this around and tweak it until I find the right spot that I want. And that looks pretty good, so I'll go there. Now when I come into this section, I can trim off the bottom. Now to do this little section in here, a lot of people would use splines, and I'm going to do one with a spline and one with continuous sketch because I do think continuous sketch is much cleaner and easier to control than a spline. And for a lot of reasons. So spline, you have 4 different methods. And I'm going to just go off to the side here and show you guys. So an approximated spline, it's pretty straightforward. It's just making that nice organic line. Same thing with spline interpolated. I'm going to try to make similar profiles for all 4 of these. These two are almost identical. Spline fit fits between the points. So it's going to give you a different result. Blend is the only one that can be tangent to each point. So you notice it kind of shifts as I click on the screen. That one forces tangency from one point to the next point along that spline. Now really for tracing, I usually use spline interpolated. That is the easiest one to manipulate and use. And actually, let me bring those back. One of the reasons that I don't care for using splines often is when you go to use, like say, drag corner or deform, drag corner can really throw things off. It's kind of manipulating that line a different way. And then deform, depending on where your snap points are, can bend the entire thing. So you're really kind of playing with fire if you're not making enough data points. You can see it's manipulating part of that line, but not the whole thing. So splines do become a little bit harder to kind of manipulate and utilize when you're having to bend and flex them into place. So So a lot of times I used to, before I started using continuous sketches, I would make splines and then use explode to turn it into arcs and lines. So that way it was easier to control, but then that was just more work. So really what I do now is use continuous sketch for most everything. But we'll do both. First one we'll do is the spline. And again, spline interpolated is the easiest one to kind of start out with. And I'm going to start outside of this because I need to create my first point to start the spline. And I'm just going to follow along the edge. Now, the closer you get, the better the control. The more data points you have, the better the control. Splines can get really tricky if you do wide sections. You can see it's starting to bend all that. So the closer you keep these segments, the better it is for you to control this. So there's my spline, my first one. Now this section, I may want to bend that so it follows kind of the rest of it. So let's go to utilities, we'll do deform. I'll just kind of grab this and tweak it. Sorry, notice my computer's getting a little warm, so I'll turn on my fan. Oh, that's pretty decent. Kind of lines up with it pretty well. But now I can actually go in here and quick trim. Get rid of part of the radius I don't need. Now this other side, I'm going to do this with continuous sketch. Continuous sketch kind of works the same way as you're going to want to make a lot of data points. And I'll actually do this the same way. So the more points I click on, the more control I'm going to have. But you'll notice some sections I might have to make short. Some sections I can make longer. I'm getting an actual radius in the corner. Now this isn't going to be as tangent as a spline, so there may be a little bit more manipulation after the fact. I just find these to be a little easier to kind of use. So it's really not too much different. You're still going to have the same kind of issues. However, with the continuous sketch, now I have defined radiuses. So if I need to bend one section, it's a little bit easier to, and it's not going to deform the next section next to it. That's the real major difference between the two. It's really not terrible. I don't think I'm going to do too much to it. Maybe drag this corner up here, this corner over, and then I can go in and deform these. Because again, these little sharp corners like that, the tool's not really going to leave that detail. We'll do a drag corner, maybe manipulate this guy. So I can even just change where the corner is, so if my radius doesn't quite match up, I can kind of force it to. You know, right here I kind of have a sharp corner, so I can bring this in and then deform this section. I don't like the way that looks, so we're just going to bend this a little bit. Maybe bend this a little bit. Maybe we'll change that corner. Yeah, maybe even do something like that. That'll probably be easier. Yeah, there we go. So they don't look too much different, but you notice that this one's got more of a wavy, you know, it's hard to get those pinpoint precision when you're trying to create a spline. That's where I find using the continuous sketch, you can get a little cleaner geometry, a little easier to manipulate all around. Now splines do really work well for like these eyes. I use a lot of the continuous sketch for this. Actually, I started using line continuous for this because I can just kind of make a real quick geometry there and then deform it. I find making straight lines and then going back and deforming things to be a lot easier in most cases. Not all cases, but in most cases. So I can still drag these corners, get this stuff kind of moved around to get the right radius. Really, drag, corner, and deform are going to be your best friends whenever you're doing BobART. Man, you guys are so quiet today. Normally I get some kind of comment or something throughout the morning. And we'll do continuous sketch for the eyes too. Why not? Start in this corner. Continuous sketch can be nice because you can do wider sections than you can with spline. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. There we go. Now I may go in here and drag this corner a little bit. Ooh. So it didn't snap. So that's not great. Let's go ahead and delete that line. Line continuous unfortunately does not have a snap to closest, so in the connecting geometries, you really do have to make sure you get that snap point. I went a little quick on that and it didn't. So just be aware as you're drawing, make sure you hit those snap points with everything. Even line, even though they added the snap to closest, it's still a good idea to... I don't like where my radius is kind of made, so let's undo that one. Depending on where you put your pivot point, it can change your line continuous or continuous sketch. And just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and bend this one so it kind of matches the other one a little bit. Maybe give it a little bit of a radius. Maybe drag this corner back a little bit. Define that radius a little more. Turn off the image. Now I can drag the corner upward and make it nice and smooth, nice tangent. There we go. Much better. Oh, thanks, Kenneth. We appreciate you guys joining us even if you're quiet. And bear with me 1 second, guys. I'll be right back. All right, sorry about that. So we'll continue with this one a little bit. Like I said, I use the line continuous quite a bit, especially for these long segments. I usually just go in and sketch straight lines. There's actually a lot you can do with just straight lines in this. Because of the deform and drag corner, it just makes doing these things a lot easier with line. So sketching those straight lines makes easy work of that section. More radiuses even in here. Do those really quick. These little sections on the cylinder heads, I usually just do a little rectangle. And as long as I right-click and hit OK in between each one of these, I can continue drawing and I don't have to go back into continuous sketch. So it doesn't matter if it's even a good sketch. It's just there to kind of give me something to work off of. So the real detail starts coming in when you do the drag corner and deform. So now I can go into each one of these and bend it into place. Make sure the corners look good. Like this one looks pretty good here, but this one narrowed up quite a bit. So I may want to drag some corners. Maybe widen it just a hair. And then deform them the rest of the way. Mostly just looking for it to look tangent. And those two actually look pretty decent. Now the radius is on the inside and in here, I'd probably just use arc. Now again, I would use the arc 2-point diameter. Makes real quick work of these because you could just pick 2 points, kind of eyeball it into place. You don't even have to really be that terribly accurate. Now we're pretty much open things up for Q&A, so if any of you guys have any questions, please ask. If we don't get any questions, we'll probably break for lunch a little bit early. But I'm just going to kind of keep going through this, guys, sketching some of this. So if any of you guys have any questions, let me know. This afternoon, we're going to take a look at embossing from an image and the embossing tools, the basics, and we'll kind of see where we go from there. All right, so I've gotten most of all that done. Let's get the inside section under here. Now again, I use continuous sketch for this. Makes it real easy just to kind of create these radiuses and bend arcs into place. I don't really like that one, so I'm just going to do another click. That one looks pretty good, but I don't want to go too far, so let's go down right about there. Make a little straight segment. So I've gotten this little portion started. Let's go ahead and go into our utilities, deform. I'm going to have to deform this a little bit, drag some corners around. Maybe drag this corner down a little bit. Maybe bring that one in a little bit. Don't like this section right here. Just looks bad no matter what I do. And bring that out a little bit more. Yeah, that'll be fine. Let's take this corner. You would want to resize after you vectorize. So Kenneth is asking, so you need to resize before you vectorize. Now you would want to, if you're scaling this up, you would want to get all of your vectorization or tracing everything and then resize it. Because if you resize it ahead of time, it may not give you the size that you think. No problem. Depends on the amount of kind of white area or blank area is in the image. So like I said, with say this one, right now this image is sitting at, let's just delete this guy. Six inches across. And I should have remembered that because I made the rectangle. But if I go in and vectorize it, let's actually just bring it back a little bit. It was 6 inches across of the rectangle that I made. However, if I go in and edit this and I change anything, I'm already sitting at almost 11 by 6. So there's a lot of blank void area. This is the image. So there's all this section on either side. So if I wanted that 12 inches across, sure, it's going to scale it so that the X and Y are keeping the same aspect ratio. But it really didn't change the size very much. And the actual image that I got is not very big. If I do a measure 2 in between these two lines, I'm looking at less than 7.5. So you want to take that and scale it, not the image. And I'm just hitting Control Z to undo, if any of you guys were curious. All right, so let's kind of continue with this. So I'll go to a line, and I'm constantly changing what type of geometry I'm using. So I'm using a line continuous here, but then I'm going to go back to a continuous sketch for the remainder. So I can make some pretty nice organic geometry with this continuous sketch. And that one I don't really care for, so I'm going to probably change the data points. And by changing those corners, it's just using the drag corner. Yeah, I may want to drag that corner a little bit, bend to this radius a little bit. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And again, to hide and show the image, I'm hitting the I key on my keyboard. There are a list of the single key shortcuts and even the Windows shortcuts that we support. We do support all the Windows standard shortcuts for copy and paste and print and file new and all that good stuff. So if any of you guys are familiar with those, we do utilize them. Now I normally get the question, could you mirror this over? If you get one side really good and you just want to mirror it, you can try, but with something like this, because it's a hand-drawn image, the likelihood that they're going to be perfectly symmetrical is very slim to none. So in some cases, yes, you probably could mirror once you get one side done, but in this particular example, it doesn't work. I've tried, things are way off. But already in short work, I've pretty much sketched most of this drawing. I have a little section down here to do. Again, continuous sketch. Yeah, looks pretty good. Came out pretty decent. So now I have just the little section of the jaw, which is just line continuous. And sometimes you really do have to kind of just make a decision of what you're going to follow. Whether you're going to follow the same type of edge all the time. Images kind of get goofy. You're looking at pixels when you get really far in there. So you may have to kind of manipulate and kind of play with what you're really wanting to focus on. And it is art after all. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like those, I might want to bend them just a little bit, just radius and hair, but it's such a small amount that I'm not even going to worry about it. Like I said, we're open up for Q&A now, so if any of you guys have any questions, let me know. I'm going to be right back, and we'll address any questions you guys may have. So Randall is asking, how do you upload images from the web into the program? So when you're using really anything, we're going to go over more images and stuff this afternoon, but we'll just search logos. You go to the image search. Now you don't want the thumbnail of anything. The thumbnail is always going to be a small, low resolution. So let's say we want to use Lego. Once you get to this screen, you can right-click on it and save image as. You just want to make sure that you know what it is. So this one's an SVG, a PNG file. We'll just make it Lego. And I'll put that in my pictures. So now that it's saved, I go into BobCAD and then just go to BobART. So whether you have the image on like a flash drive or you have the image from another source, as long as it's on your computer, you're just going to load image. How you get the image is, up to you guys. But now that I've got it in that folder, I can tell it what type of image I'm looking for, which is PNG. And it brings the image in. Now, as far as getting the G code, that would be different. So it looks like you have a second part to that question. Do you use the thumb drive to input the drawings to the table for the actual engraving process? Yeah, depending on how your setup is. When you get your G code by posting out your code, you just right-click milling job and go to post. You can take this file, save it to a flash drive or network drive, whatever location you need it to, and then that would go to your machine. And a little slightly known fact, if any of you guys are on version 34, you can change the font type in your posting window. So you can actually change the font that is showing up in this window if you're having problems reading it, or we had a few people that really wanted a specific font. So now they can. Yeah, there was a lot of new good additions, and I think I want to say the other trainers, I might have been out of town the week that we did it, but I believe we've done a What's New in 34. So if any of you guys are not on 34 or haven't seen what's new in it and own it, you should be able to go to our website, BobCADsupport.com, not help desk. That's something different. And under training, there should be the virtual training, recorded virtual events. And then they break them down. So there's mill videos, lathe videos, wire EDM, BobART. We already have a bunch of them there, laser plasma water jet. So I guess they didn't do... They did a What's New version 33. Either we haven't done the What's New in 34 or it's not up here yet, because I want to say we did one a while ago, but you can always check every new version if you go into the help system. You have this handy-dandy tab up at the top, the What's New, and you can see all the new features from that version. Some of the big things that we added, mid snap points are now on solids. Snap the closest. We have a lot of multi-axis stuff that we added. Project curves to curves for ports and things like that. Project curves to a distant direction. So it's not just vertical anymore. You can actually have it go across along the line. Diameter and radius fields now for art creation, and that's for most all. Any time you would enter a radius, just about, they have that available. Layer Manager now has groups, so you can group things into groups of layers. Solid chamfer got some improvements. Silhouette was a nice little feature where you can actually just take geometry from a complex solid model. Selection manager, so you can save selections. So if you have things like, especially in the case of doing like multi-axis machining where you're picking individual surfaces, you want to make sure you're picking the same stuff all the time. It's a really easy way to save your selections so you can reselect them. ISO curves, extract ISO curves, really handy for measuring some of those more complicated shapes. All that tree behavior that I showed you guys earlier. Shows some examples of all that. Posting fonts. We now have coolant options, so if any of you guys have through tool coolant and you're not on 34, you're going to want to be on 34. You can now just program in every program and not have to pay support for a post to do it. It's all built into the software now, so you can add in the variables for any type of coolant you have. You can copy features with geometry now, but only within the same file. Some backplot options, some just niceties, really not huge improvements, but just the way that things are focused got updated. You can post individual operations now, which is super handy, especially if you don't have a tool changer, because you can now, in the case of like this, where I'm using two different tools, I can right-click on the tapered pocketing and post that by itself. Then I can right-click on the VCarve finishing and post it by itself. So you now have a little bit more flexibility with posting. You can actually post a feature altogether. You can post a machine setup, or you can always post the milling job. But we're still here for any questions. Okay, so Kenneth asked, in VCarve, how do you get it to just trace the line without fill? You can't. It's not an engrave. You would use engraving if you wanted to just to follow the line. Yep. It's a pocketing toolpath. You can't just cut a single line. All right, it doesn't look like there's any more questions at the moment, so I think we're going to go ahead and break for lunch. We'll be back at 1 Eastern. I'm actually going to close my BobCAD and reopen it. And then this afternoon, like I said, we're going to go over some of the embossing, different image types, details like that. So we will see you guys at 1 Eastern.